My name is Mara Osei, and I was 36 the night Roland Ashford looked across a candlelit dinner table in his Napa Valley estate, swirled his Bordeaux, and called me a stray. He didn't shout it. Men like Roland Ashford never shout. They have spent too many decades in rooms where the ceiling is high and the silence expensive to ever need volume. What they use instead is precision. A low, cultivated voice designed to travel across white linen and Waterford crystal and land exactly where they aimed it. Squarely in the chest. In front of 30 guests who mattered to him and were therefore supposed to matter to me. What Roland didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the company he had spent the last 9 months desperately trying to acquire was mine. I want to tell you that story. Not the version that leaked to the financial press by Tuesday morning. Not the version Roland's lawyers tried to spin for the next 6 months. The real one. The one that starts not in a boardroom, but in a girl who grew up understanding that the world has 2 kinds of tables. The ones you're born at, and the ones you build yourself. I had built mine from nothing. Literally from nothing. From a shared apartment with 3 other women in Oakland. From night shifts at a pharmacy counter. From a paralegal certificate earned between double shifts. From a biotech idea sketched on the back of a bus transfer at 2 a.m, because that was the only quiet hour I had. From 10 years of working in rooms where people like Roland Ashford looked through me the way you look through a window. Not at it, through it. By 36, Zenith Bioworks had patents in 3 countries. We had completed an IPO that the Wall Street Journal called quietly seismic. We had a valuation that would have made 24-year-old Mara, still smelling of pharmacy antiseptic and student loan anxiety, sit down hard on the pavement and cry. But none of that was visible at Roland Ashford's table. What was visible was the dress I had bought off the rack, because I genuinely do not believe in spending $4,000 on fabric. What was visible was that I had driven myself in a car that was sensible rather than symbolic, parked between a Bentley and a Porsche like a punctuation mark nobody had planned for. What was visible, to a man like Roland, was exactly what he had found when he ran his background check. The girl from nowhere. The woman with no lineage. The stray. He had found everything he was looking for and missed everything that mattered. He set down his glass. He didn't look at me. He addressed Caleb, his son, with the patience of a man correcting an error in front of witnesses, so the lesson lands harder. We don't bring strays to the table, Roland said. We might feed them at the door, but we don't seat them with the family. It confuses the bloodline. 30 forks stopped moving. Caleb went pale beside me, and I sat there with my hands flat and still in my lap, and I let the words land because I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you can do in a room like that is flinch. I didn't flinch. I waited, and then I said the only sentence I had come prepared to say if it ever got this far. Thank you for the clarity, I told Roland Ashford, in a voice that did not shake. It is genuinely rare to meet a man so eager to show a room exactly how small he really is. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. If this opening found you at the right moment, if you have ever sat at a table that made you feel like you didn't belong, you are exactly who this story is for. Welcome to Dramatic Revenge, where we tell stories about dignity, boundaries, and the moment someone finally stops shrinking. Subscribe now and turn on the bell. I want to go back before I go forward, because the dinner table only makes sense if you understand the road that led to it. I grew up in Accra until I was 7, and then in a 1-bedroom apartment in East Oakland with my mother and my Aunt Abina, who worked nights and slept in shifts and made sure I had a uniform clean for school every morning even when they had nothing else to give. My mother cleaned offices downtown. My aunt drove a delivery van. They were the hardest working women I have ever known, and they had nothing and gave me everything they could reach. What they could not give me was the thing Roland Ashford had been handed at birth. The name, the access, the invisible door that opens in certain rooms for certain people before they have done a single thing to earn it. I learned about that door early, not bitterly, just clearly, the way you learn that weather exists. It is not personal, it simply is, and if you cannot walk through it, you find another way in, or you build the building yourself. I chose to build. Community college first. Then a transfer to San Francisco State on a scholarship I applied for without telling anyone, because I did not want to carry the weight of other people's hope until I knew I could carry my own. I studied biology and stayed late in labs that smelled of ethanol and ambition. I made friends with the equipment because the equipment did not care where I came from. I worked nights. pharmacy counter, then a hospital admin desk, then a biotech reception job that paid $11 an hour and gave me a front row seat to the industry I intended to conquer. I listened to everything. I asked questions of everyone who would answer them. I filed away information the way a person files away the combination to a lock they intend to open one day. By the time I was 28, I had a patent application and a business plan and exactly $4,000 in savings. I went to 11 investors before the 12th said yes. I remember all 11 rejections in the specific physical detail of each room where they happened. The lighting, the quality of the chairs, the particular way each person looked at my application and then at me and decided I did not match. I used every single one of those rooms as information. What do they need that they can't see yet? What problem are they too comfortable to notice? What is the door that exists in this industry that nobody has thought to build, because everyone who gets here early enough has always been let in through the front? Zenith Bioworks was the answer to those questions. We worked in the gap between legacy pharmaceutical infrastructure and next-generation biotech. We were lean and fast, and we protected our IP with the ferocity of people who had built it from nothing and knew exactly what it was worth. By the time Caleb Ashford walked into my life at a San Francisco conference 2 years ago, Zenith was already in quiet acquisition talks with 3 legacy energy and biomedical companies. I had used a holding company and a proxy CEO for the negotiations deliberately, not to be secretive for its own sake, but because I had learned, over a decade of building, that the moment certain people see my face attached to a valuation, the number changes in their minds. The math stops being about the company and starts being about their own discomfort. I was protecting the deal from their bias. I was also, without knowing it, setting the stage for what would happen in Roland Ashford's dining room 9 months later. When the man who called me a stray would finally understand that the company he was begging to save his legacy had been mine all along. Caleb told me his father was formal. He said it the way people describe, whether when they want you to pack an umbrella without alarming you about the storm. I had been in enough rooms to translate. Formal meant that warmth was conditional. Formal meant there was an order to things, and an expectation that new people would locate themselves within that order quickly and accurately. Formal meant that Roland Ashford had a way the world was supposed to work, and that people who didn't fit neatly into it created in him not curiosity but irritation. I knew the type. I had been building around the type my entire career. What I had not fully prepared for was the performance of it, the theater, because Roland Ashford did not merely believe these things privately. He believed them publicly and at volume, and in the specific language of a man who had never once been challenged on them in his own home. The estate itself was a statement. 70 acres in Napa, stone and glass and old money landscaping. The kind of property that announces itself a quarter mile before the gate. The dining room seated 40. The table was a single slab of reclaimed walnut that I later learned had been commissioned from a craftsman in Vermont for a sum I did not ask about because it would have made me angry. 30 guests. Senators. Energy executives. Old California families whose names were on buildings I had walked past without knowing who they belonged to. And me, in the dress I had bought at a department store on a Tuesday, because I genuinely had better uses for the money. I felt the temperature of the room before I sat down. I always feel it. That particular chill of a space where acceptance is not offered, only auditioned for. I had spent my whole life auditioning in rooms like this, and I had spent the last 10 years deciding I was done. I sat down anyway, because Caleb had asked me to, and because I loved him, and because some part of me genuinely believed that a man who had raised a son as decent as Caleb could not be entirely unreachable. I was wrong about that last part. Roland waited until the second course. Strategy, I understood later. Let the guests settle. Let the wine do a little work. Let the target relax slightly so the moment lands harder. He didn't look at me when he said it. That was the choreography of it. The looking away was deliberate. It communicated to everyone at the table that I was not worth the direction of his gaze. "We don't bring strays to the table," he said to Caleb, who had gone rigid beside me. "It confuses the bloodline. It's actually unkind to her. Look at her. She knows she doesn't belong here." 30 people held their breath. I pressed my nails into my palm under the tablecloth, and I used the sharpness to stay exactly where I was, which was composed, which was still, which was the stillness of a woman who has faced harder rooms than this one and emerged carrying everything she walked in with. Then I put my napkin on the table. I smoothed it once. I stood up. And I said my line. I walked out of Roland Ashford's dining room at a pace I had chosen deliberately. Not hurried, not performative. The pace of a woman who has somewhere better to be and is in no particular hurry because she has already decided the outcome. I passed a painting in the hallway that I recognized as a genuine Basquiat. I noted it the way I note everything useful. Then I passed the staff, who were frozen with the particular stillness of people who have witnessed something and are uncertain whether witnessing it is safe. Then the security detail at the front door, who held it open without a word. The gravel of the driveway was loud under my shoes. The night was clear and cold and smelled of vineyard. I was almost to my car when I heard him. Mara, wait. Caleb, running across the gravel in his dinner jacket, tie undone, looking like a man who had just made a decision he hadn't known he was going to make until it was already happening. I am so sorry, he said. I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know he was going to do that. I looked at him. I loved him. I want to be clear about that because the story is easier to tell if I didn't, and I did. But looking at him there in the cold Napa air, what I saw was fear. Not cruelty. Not complicity. Fear. And there is an important difference between those things, but it is not a difference that changes what you have to do next. He called me a stray, I said. He's been drinking. He's stressed about the merger. I'll fix this. I will make him fix this. You can't fix a rot that deep, I said. He didn't just insult me, Caleb. He dehumanized me. In front of 30 people. And you sat there for 10 seconds before you spoke. I was in shock. I was in hell, I said. There's a difference. I opened my car door. Don't let him win, Caleb said. Don't let him break what we have. I looked back at the estate. Stone and glass and 70 acres of money that had never once had to justify itself. He can't break what he doesn't own, I said. Go back inside. Your father expects you to finish dessert. I drove away. I watched the Ashford estate shrink in my mirrors until it was nothing but a glow against the dark hills. My hands started shaking somewhere on the highway. The adrenaline dropping. The body finally sending the bill for what the mind had held together. My phone rang. Dana. 9:30 on a Saturday. Mara, she said, tight and careful. I know where you are, but the legal team for the acquisition just emailed. Ashford Industries is pushing to move the signing to Monday morning. They're pressing hard. I pulled onto the shoulder. I looked at the dark sky over the valley. Ashford Industries. The legacy giant. Bleeding cash. Desperate to pivot. 9 months into acquisition talks with a company they did not know belonged to the woman their patriarch had just called a stray at his own dinner table. Dana, I said. Yes, Miss Osei. Kill it. Silence. Did you say kill the merger? Terminate the letter of intent, I said. Pull the financing. Notify the SEC we are withdrawing effective immediately. Mara, this deal is worth $4.5 billion. Write the termination check. And Dana, send the notice directly to Roland Ashford's personal email. Cite incompatible values and toxic leadership. Those exact words. He's going to panic. This deal is their lifeline. I know, I said. Set up a meeting with Crestline Energy. If Ashford won't sell to me, I'll buy the company that drives them into the ground. And Dana, yes, get me a coffee. It's going to be a long night. I did not sleep. I sat on the balcony of my San Francisco penthouse, and I drank the coffee Dana had sent up from the place on the corner that stays open all night. And I watched the city do what cities do at 3 a.m, which is breathe without anyone watching. And I thought about what I was doing and whether I was certain. I want to be honest about this part, because I think people who tell this kind of story sometimes skip it. The doubt. The part of the night where you sit with what you've decided, and you let it be fully real, and you make sure you can carry it. $4.5 billion is not a number. It is people. It is 2,000 employees at Ashford Industries who had nothing to do with what happened at that table. It is shareholders and pension funds and supply chains. I knew that. I had known it before I made the call. But I also know this, from a decade of building in an industry that did not want me there. There are partnerships you walk away from not because the numbers are wrong, but because the person across the table has shown you who they are. And who they are will corrupt everything downstream if you let them close enough. The rot Roland Ashford had displayed at that table was not a bad night. It was a value system. It was the water his entire organization swam in. And I was not going to pour $4.5 billion into water like that. I had made the right call. By 7 a.m, my phone was a different kind of loud. Missed calls from Caleb, 8 of them. Missed calls from lawyers. Missed calls from a number I had never seen before that I recognized from the acquisition documents. Roland Ashford. I let it ring. All 6 times. At 8:30, Dana buzzed my intercom. Miss Osei, there is a man in the lobby. He says it is extremely urgent. He is currently arguing with building security. Expensive suit, I said. Red face. Looks like he hasn't slept. That is a precise description, yes. Put him in the glass conference room, I said. The east-facing one. The sun is brutal in there until 10. Let him sit for 25 minutes. You are a specific kind of terrible, Dana said. I am a stray, I said. We have poor table manners. I took my time. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but because I have learned that the way you enter a room tells everyone in it how much you have thought about being there. I thought about it. I wore the suit I wear when I want to be taken seriously by people who did not initially plan to take me seriously. I did not bring notes. I did not bring Dana. I did not bring the lawyers who were a phone call away. I brought myself. That was always going to be enough. Roland Ashford was pacing the conference room like a man who had spent the night discovering what it felt like to have no options. He looked diminished. Not in height, not in the expensive cut of his jacket, but in the particular quality that had filled the room the night before. That absolute certainty that the world was correctly arranged and he was correctly placed at the top of it. That was gone. What was left was a man in an expensive suit running the math on a problem he hadn't seen coming. He turned when I opened the door and his face ran through its sequence. Confusion first. Then the contempt, arriving on reflex the way it always did. Then something underneath the contempt beginning to move slowly, like an animal turning over in sleep. You, he said. What are you doing here? I am waiting for the owner of Zenith. Get out, Mara. I don't have time. I didn't answer. I walked to the head of the table and sat down in the chair that cost more than my first car, and I crossed my legs, and I looked at him with the same steadiness I had used at his table 12 hours earlier. Please sit down, Roland. He froze. He looked at me. He looked at the chair. He looked at the Zenith Bioworks logo on the wall behind my head. He looked back at me, and I watched the realization move through him the way a tide moves through an estuary. Slowly at first, then all at once, filling every available space. No, he said. It came out small. That's not possible. You ran a background check, I said. You found the East Oakland apartment. You found the community college. You found the pharmacy counter and the student loans and the off-the-rack dress. You found everything you were looking for, and you stopped looking. I leaned forward. You missed the patents, Roland. You missed the IPO. You missed the fact that the stray you educated your guests about last night owns the oxygen your company needs to breathe. He sat down. Not a choice exactly. More like his legs made the decision before his pride could intervene. There has been a misunderstanding, he said. His voice had lost its architecture. Last night I had been drinking. It was a private dinner. It had no connection to business. It had everything to do with business, I said. My business is built on looking for value where people like you see nothing. Yours is built on the assumption that origin determines worth. Those are not compatible foundations. I don't partner with that model. I dismantle it. You cannot do this, he said, and the desperation was surfacing now, breaking through the composure like something long submerged. Without this acquisition, Ashford Industries is insolvent in 6 months. The stock will collapse by noon. Think of the employees. Think of Caleb's future. I am thinking of Caleb, I said. I am thinking he deserves a father who doesn't humiliate women in front of senators. And I am thinking he deserves a future not built on a sinking company with a toxic culture at the top. My phone buzzed on the table between us. That's Crestline, I said, glancing at it. They are very enthusiastic about the terms. Roland looked at the phone, then at me, then at the window, as if the city outside might offer him something the room wouldn't. Name your price, he said. Board seat. Renegotiation. Anything. I don't want a seat, I said. I want the table. I want to tell you what I offered him, because I think it matters that I offered him something at all. There are people who would have let Roland Ashford's company collapse, who would have signed with Crestline that morning and watched from a distance as 40 years of his legacy turned to dust. I understand that appetite. I had sat in his dining room 12 hours earlier and felt what he had aimed at me land. I am not made of stone. But I had not built Zenith Bioworks by making decisions from the wound. I had built it by making decisions from the strategy. and the strategy said that a controlled acquisition served more people than a collapse. The employees deserved better than to lose their livelihoods because their chairman had bad values and worse judgment. The technology inside Ashford Industries was real and worth preserving. And there was a version of this outcome where I took what was good and rebuilt it on a foundation that didn't rot. So I gave him the deal. Zenith Bioworks would acquire Ashford Industries. Not a merger, an acquisition. We would buy him out at a figure that was honest about what the company was actually worth in its current condition, which was considerably less than what Pride would have preferred, but considerably more than zero, which was the alternative. The employees would be protected. The technology would be integrated. The Ashford name would remain on 2 legacy divisions where it carried genuine market value. One condition: Roland Ashford would resign immediately. No golden parachute. No consulting retainer. No chairman emeritus title dressed in neutral language to protect his ego. He would walk out of the building he had built and not return. I built that company from nothing, he said. So did I said. The difference is I didn't need to humiliate anyone to do it. He was quiet for a long time. I let the quiet exist. I have learned to be comfortable in the silences that other people find unbearable. I have been sitting in uncomfortable silences since I was a child, and I have never once made a better decision by rushing to fill them. You have 1 hour, I said. After that, I sign with Crestline and your stock hits 0. I stood up. On your way out, I said, use the service elevator. We prefer to keep the lobby clear for people who belong here. I left him in the glass room with the brutal morning sun in his eyes and the decision he didn't want to make waiting for him like a bill long overdue. I went back to my office. Caleb was there. He was sitting on the sofa with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, still in the dinner jacket from the night before, looking like a man who had been awake for reasons that had nothing to do with the acquisition and everything to do with himself. He looked up when I came in. His eyes were red. I heard, he said. The news is already moving. The stock is in free fall. I gave him a choice, I said. I know. Caleb stood up slowly. He called me. This morning. He screamed. He told me to fix you. He stopped, took a breath, and I told him that he was right about exactly one thing. That I didn't deserve you. Not for the reasons he thought, but genuinely. I hadn't been enough last night when it counted. He crossed the room and stopped a careful distance away, like a man who understood he was not entitled to the closeness he wanted and was asking for it anyway. I resigned this morning, he said, before the stock moved, before I knew any of this. I called the board at 7 and I resigned and I told them why. I don't want the inheritance if this is the culture it comes with. I don't want the name if the name means I sit there for 10 seconds while someone I love is being torn apart. I looked at him for a long time. I was looking, as I always look, for the calculation underneath. The angle. The thing someone wants from me that isn't what they're saying they want. I didn't find it. What I found was a man sitting with the consequences of a choice that had cost him something real. On a morning when walking away from the cost would have been easy, telling me the truth about it without asking for anything in return. You walked away from everything, I said. I walked away from him, Caleb said. I'd rather be a stray with you than a prince with him. I had not cried through any of it. Not at the table. Not on the highway shoulder. Not during the long coffeeless hours of the night on the balcony. I had held it all in the particular container that a lifetime of needing to be the steadiest person in the room builds in you. Something in that sentence opened the container just slightly. I pulled him in. The good news, I said into his shoulder, is that I'm hiring. And I hear we're acquiring an energy company that desperately needs someone who understands what non-toxic leadership actually looks like. He laughed. It was a broken, exhausted, genuine laugh, and it was the best sound that building had produced all morning. By noon, Roland Ashford had signed his resignation in the glass conference room, while I watched through the wall. He used a pen that had his initials on it. I noticed that. He had brought his own pen. Even at the end, even with his hands shaking and his empire contracting to a single sheet of paper, Roland Ashford brought his own monogrammed pen. I found it almost moving, the way a person clings to the artifacts of identity when the identity itself is dissolving. He didn't look up when he finished. He just sat there for a moment, the signed page in front of him, and then he stood and straightened his jacket and walked out. He used the service elevator. I don't know if he chose it deliberately or if he just found the nearest door. By 2 o'clock, The acquisition was announced through a joint press release that Dana had spent the night drafting, and I had approved at 11:15 with 3 small edits. The financial press used words like surprising and seismic and unexpected. They interviewed analysts who offered careful takes on the valuation. None of them knew about the dinner. Not yet. By evening they did. I don't know exactly how it traveled. These things move the way true things move. Not in a straight line, but in all directions at once, passing through the 30 people who had been in that dining room, and then through everyone those 30 people knew. Until by midnight it was a thing that people who had not been in Napa the previous night were texting each other about in rooms across the country. The version that circulated was reasonably accurate, which surprised me. Usually these stories flatten. The character becomes a symbol, the complexity drops out, and what remains is a fable. But enough people who had been at that table told it straight, perhaps because they were ashamed of what they'd witnessed, perhaps because the truth was already extraordinary enough not to need embellishment. The stray who ate the wolf. That was the headline a financial blogger used, and it traveled further than anything the press release said. I never spoke to Roland again. I didn't need to. I had said what needed to be said. The last image I have of him is through the glass wall, pen in hand, finally understanding what I had understood on a highway shoulder the night before. The new world. The one being built by people who earned everything they have with no inheritance of access or name. Does not care whose table you were born at. It cares what you build. It cares what you bring. It cares whether you have the particular stubbornness of a woman who has been called astray enough times to understand that the word says everything about the person using it and nothing about it. I had built Zenith Bioworks on that stubbornness. I had built it on the pharmacy counter and the parking lot study sessions and the 11 rejections before the 12th yes. I had built it on every room that looked through me and every table that didn't have a seat for me until I built my own. And I had built it for exactly this. Not for revenge. For proof. For the undeniable, notarized SEC-filed, majority shareholder proof that where you start is not where you end. And that the people who counted you out in the beginning owe the world nothing so much as a front row seat to where you arrived. Roland Ashford had a front row seat. I hoped he had enjoyed the view. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is a business transaction. You identify the problem precisely. You remove it cleanly. You build something better in the space it occupied. You do not do it in anger because anger is imprecise and imprecision is expensive. You do it with the same care and patience you would bring to any other deal that matters. And then you move on, because the transaction is complete, and you have better things to do. Caleb joined Zenith 6 weeks after the acquisition closed. Not in a role that was invented for him, in a role that was open, that he was qualified for, that he earned through a process that did not know his last name until it was over. He worked harder than anyone expected, possibly because he was proving something to himself that had nothing to do with me. I understood that. I had spent my whole career proving something. The only difference was what we were each trying to prove and to whom. Ashford Industries, rebranded within the year as Ashford Zenith Clean Energy, turned profitable in 18 months under new leadership. 2,000 people kept their jobs. The technology that Roland had been too proud and too slow to develop properly was brought to market, and it was, as we had always believed it would be, genuinely good. I think about Roland sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. In the way you occasionally think about a storm that hit your windows hard one night, and by morning was simply weather that had passed. I think about the 30 people at that table. The senators and the oil executives and the old California families who sat with their forks suspended between plate and mouth while a man educated them about strays. I wonder what they thought. I wonder which ones knew, watching it happen, that they were watching something that would not end the way he expected. I think about the drive home on the highway shoulder, the dark sky over the valley, Dana's voice tight on the other end of the phone. The moment I made the call that changed everything, not from rage, but from the cold, clear knowledge that I had built something and I knew what it was worth, and I was not going to let anyone, regardless of their estate or their monogrammed pen or their Bordeaux, tell me otherwise. I think about what it took to build the table. Not the acquisition, not the IPO, but the actual table. The years before anyone knew the name Zenith. The double shifts and the parking lot studying and the $12 notebooks and the belief, stubborn, irrational, required, that the door would eventually open if I kept building. It did not open. I want to be accurate about that. Doors like the one Roland Ashford controlled do not open for people like me. They are not designed to. They are built specifically to stay shut for people like me. So I built my own building. And it turned out his company needed a room in it. If you have ever been called a stray, in those words or in the 1,000 quieter ways that message gets delivered, I want you to understand something I had to learn the hard way over 36 years. The table does not decide who belongs at it. The table is furniture. It has no opinion. It has no bloodline. What it has is the weight of whoever sits at the head of it, and that weight changes. It has always changed. It will always change. You are not the stray. You are the one who decides. That is Mara's story. 10 years of building. One dinner that tried to undo it, and a Monday morning that proved it never could. If this series found you at the right moment, if you have ever had to earn a place at a table that should have already had your name on it, this is your community. Welcome to Dramatic Revenge, where we tell stories about dignity, boundaries, and the moment someone finally stops shrinking. Subscribe now, turn on the notification bell, share this with someone who needs it, and drop a comment below. Have you ever walked out of a room only to come back owning it? Tell us your story. We are listening.